Hi, today I'll be reading The Beeman by Laurie, Krebs, and Valeria. Bees. There wouldn't be sunflowers, wouldn't be peas, wouldn't be apples or apple trees if it weren't for fuzzy old, buzzy old bees dusting pollen from off their knees. The Beeman. Written by Laurie Krebs. Illustrated by Valeria. Here is my grandpa, who's known in our town as the Beeman. Here is his jacket, with zippered up hood, that covers his face just the way it should, when he visits his hives as the Beeman. Here are his gloves, made of cotton and leather, protecting his hands in all kinds of weather, when he tends to his hives as the Beeman. Here is the beehive, where all the bees sleep, tucked into a box called the shallow or deep, and then placed on a stand by the Beeman. Here is the smoker that quiets the bees, and a hive tool that opens the beehives with ease, for a much closer look by the Beeman. Here is the queen bee who does her job well, and lays tiny eggs in a six-sided cell. She's the heart of the hive, says the Beeman. Here are the drone bees, with big bulging eyes and a large appetite, supporting their size. They mate with the queen, adds the Beeman. Here are the workers, tens, thousands, or more, who gather the nectar and bring back and store in honeycomb cells for the Beeman. Here are the house bees, with the swift-moving wings that dry up the nectar a worker bee brings, making honey for me and the Beeman. Here's the extractor, its clickety-clank, removing the honey from frames on the rack and filling up jars for the Beeman. Here's some of the honey returned to the hive. It's food for the bees to help them survive the long winter days near the Beeman. Here are the bees protected from harm inside the hive, huddled cozy and warm. So they'll be here next year, says the Beeman. Here is the wagon, filled up to the brim with bottles of honey collected by him and brought to the house by the Beeman. Here are the muffins, all warm and delicious, and dripping with honey, our grandma's best dishes. I'm glad that my grandpa's the Beeman. Bees. Honeybees belong to the insect family. They have 6 legs, 3 body parts, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, 2 pairs of wings, 2 antennae, and 2 compound eyes that let them see in all directions. A honeybee begins as an egg placed in a tiny cell by the queen. The egg hatches into a worm-like creature called a larva. The larva changes into a pupa, and hidden inside the tiny cells, the pupa turns into a honeybee. When it hatches, the bee is fully grown and ready to be a member of the colony. It takes about 3 weeks to go from an egg to a honeybee. Bee colonies. Honeybees live in a large group called colonies. A colony of honeybees has 1 queen, several hundred drones, and tens of thousands of workers. Drone bees are male bees. They have huge black eyes and plump bodies. They mate with the queen. They don't work inside the hive or collect nectar or pollen. The queen bee has a slender body and is longer than the other bees. She is also the mother of them all. Her job is to lay eggs. In spring's busy season, she lays between 1 and 2,000 eggs every day. Wow. Worker bees are females and have many different jobs. Sometimes they feed the larva and tidy up the hive, or they create wax and use it to make new cells. Sometimes they groom the queen and give her a rich protein food called royal jelly, or they protect the hive from enemies by standing guard at the entrance. Sometimes they leave the hive to gather nectar, pollen, or water. Their job depends on what the colony needs them to do. Yeah. Beekeeping. Disease and pests have killed most of the wild honeybees. So today, beekeepers take care of the colonies. They provide weatherproof boxes where bees live. They act as insect doctors and supply medicine to keep the colony healthy. They check the queen to see that she is strong and that her new bees are developing. And just before fall, the beekeepers harvest the hive's extra honey, making sure they put back enough honey for the bees to use all winter. Beekeepers have special clothing that help them to do their job safely. They wear long gloves, coveralls, boots, and a hood with a protective veil to keep them away curious bees. Hives. A beekeeper's hives are the boxes where the colony lives, raising its young, and stores its honey and pollen. Large wooden boxes, called deeps, are placed on the bottom. Stacked on top of the deeps are shallows, smaller boxes that hold the honey. As they are filled, more shallows are added by the beekeeper and the tower grows taller. Frames and honeycomb cells. Frames are man-made wooden rectangles that support the honeycomb. They are lined up in the shallows and deeps, like folders in a filing cabinet. The honeycomb is the cluster of wax cells built into the frames by the bees to hold eggs, larvae, honey, and pollen. The smoker. The beekeepers use a metal container called the smoker, in which they build a smoky fire. When beekeepers inspect the hive, they puff the smoke to calm the bees. And then this is a hive tool. The hive tool is used to help the beekeeper pry open the hive to examine it. This is an extractor. When it's time to harvest the honey, beekeepers remove the frame from the shallows with a hot knife. They cut away the wax cappings from the cells and place the frame inside a large bin called an extractor. It spins the frame, and the honey splashes against the walls, collecting at the bottom of the bin. Beekeepers open the extractor spigot and fill their jars with the tasty liquid. About honey. Honey tastes delicious. People have enjoyed it for thousands of years. At first, it was gathered from the nest of wild bees. Later, people made hives of clay and straw and kept bees, and the honey they made near their homes. Honey begins as nectar, the sweet watery juice inside a flower blossom. A worker bee unrolls her long tongue, called a proboscis, and sucks up the liquid. Just as though they were using a straw. Back in the hive, other workers called the nectar into the cells and fan it to drive out the moisture. After many trips to the flower and lots of fanning, the nectar juice thickens into honey. When the honey is ripe, the bees cap the cell with wax to keep it fresh. Pollination. Honeybees are important insects. Without them, we wouldn't have many delicious fruits, nuts, and vegetables. As bees travel to find nectar, they brush past the part of the flower that holds powder-like grains called pollen. When they move on to visit the next blossom, some of the pollen has left on the seed-making part of the flower. Because of this, in time, fruit, nuts, vegetables will grow. Honeybees help by carrying the pollen from one flower to another, allowing the process of pollination to occur. Bee dancing. Did you know that honeybees dance? Well, they do, and their dance tells other workers where the nectar is found and how to get there. If food is close by, they do a round dance, running in circles, first one way and then another, allowing the workers to smell and taste what they have found. The faster they dance, the richer the supply of nectar. If food is farther from the hive, they do a wagtail dance. The longer they waggle, the longer the trip will be. Making a half circle in one direction, they turn sharply and waggle in a straight line, until they again turn sharply and make a half circle in the opposite direction. The orientation of the dancer inside the hive tells the workers the direction in which they should fly. Oh, let me show you guys the picture. Then that's it. The end. That's the Beeman. Thank you guys.